Dai Gealy is a quite remarkable figure. His example of dedication and devotion and service to the college, where he was not only a boy but also a long-serving master, is quite inspirational. He's a connection to our past as well, a very rich heritage and history, and this inspirational example serves to remind our current pupils that they too are making history.
Well, good morning, Warden Geo.
Harrison.
So what were your earliest recollections of life here in college?
Entering a prison.
Entering a prison?
Really? Yes.
Was it that bad?
It was this bad. You see, you've got to remember I came from a small school in Llandovery, a small school. I'd never actually seen the college. I just happened to get one of these Carwyn 6. I can remember vividly driving up here and wondering, what was going to happen to me. Been introduced then to a person called a prefect. I'd never heard the word prefect we didn't use words like that in Tumble. Been told to take your trunk up to a dormitory. Well, of course, we never used the word dormitory at all. Bedrooms, it was everything.
So as a scholar, do you think college treated you differently? Do you think you had a different experience here in college?
Yes, they knew that we were Carwyn 6. I can remember vividly being called a yokel.
A yokel?
Yes, because of course I had a very, very broad Welsh accent. I still got that. And of course the school itself was very English, I would say. Although you had Geo Williams as the warden, who was a staunch advocate of Welshness, but it was mainly English. And of course there's a question of wealth, you see. When you consider that the people who came here had been to prep schools, the majority of them, had already done Latin and French. Coming from a primary school, it was a completely different ballgame. And luckily, I had made friends with a boy called John Michael Morgan, who did well for himself as a solicitor out in Singapore and so forth. And then Sir David John, we were friends together. But it was a different, people had, when you went to tuck shop and they'd bring out a pound, that kind of thing. We had to give Pope, when we arrived here, £1.10, which was meant to last for the whole term. That was the only bit of money that you had. And you went to the tuck shop and spent your money there. Not allowed downtown, you see.
So in the early days, are there any certain masters or teachers that stand out for you?
Oh, yes. Well, the first one, of course, he ran the school, which is Pope. Yes. And he ran the school, and not only ran the school, of course, he was, this legendary coach, rugby coach, you see. But there was him then, there was Tommy Jones, who was the old music master, a great music master, but there was no music department, you see. You could learn the piano, and of course we had a very, very good choir. So he is, but the one who had the biggest influence on me was Chris Bell, a fine teacher, fine historian, but also, of course, he taught cricket. He was the cricket coach, a wonderful cricket coach. I spent years and hours down there with him. And then, of course, he was the one who produced the school play. And he gave hours to the school. He was a bachelor at that time, but he was on play reading on Sunday evenings. You see, we used to go down to his room, and he added a bit of culture to a school which was, on the whole, I would say, didn't have a bit Philistine.
So looking back at, the school play back in your day, it was a whole school experience,
Oh,
everybody
yes.
got involved, didn't they?
Oh, yes, because of course we had no girls, you see. So all the parts, all of the parts were played by boys. And of course, this was the one thing that you used to pray for, that was that you weren't cast as a girl. Because of course everybody used to laugh at you, especially when you had to wear a brassiere or something like that, you know. And I remember a friend of mine who died recently, old Hugh Thomas, you know. Well, Hugh Thomas having to play one, you know, and I don't think that they allowed him to forget it, you know. And it was quite embarrassing. But, the play was a big thing, yes. But they were all Shakespeare, mind you.
All Shakespeare's?
All Shakespeare.
It was very traditional.
Oh yes, I first got involved in Hamlet, and then I got involved in King Lear, one of these history plays, so they were all big. And you got to remember, we had no theatre here.
No, just
they did it all. They did it in the old gym, and you had the art master from the local school who came in on Sundays, and he would paint the scenery. And the boys would help him to paint the scenery. And then, of course, which was you know, one of the best things that happened is you introduced art, and you introduced an art department. And we had a lady, Mrs. Pat Davis, who was here for years in the department, and you know, produced wonderful material, and of course added to the old culture of the school.
So as you mentioned the art department, you know, looking at your entire time here, you know, what would you say have been some of the greatest changes you've seen?
Well, I think they added to the curriculum. And, you know, obviously later on you had to introduce, economics was introduced. You see, you've got to remember that when I came here as a boy, it was a very basic education. It was based on the tradition of the, virtually going back to the sort of Greek era, you know, your Latin, your Greek, your English, Welsh, in actual fact. You didn't have classes at the beginning. You had the vicar of Maddfai who came in twice a week to teach us, the few people. I remember we were only 2, I think, in the class. A boy called Chwilog, he was from Chwilog, and he was a real, he'd won the National Eisteddfod reciting, and he then became professor of, I think, theology or something in Bangor University, and myself and maybe another one, but very few took Welsh.
So looking at aspects of daily life in college, for example, food, you know, how would you say that's changed over your time here?
Well, it couldn't have changed for the worse, I can tell you this, because it was atrocious. It was atrocious, really. And, you know, you found, for example, on half days, they didn't even give you tea. You had to use what you'd had from your parcels. So you used to share, say, a tin of plums or something with somebody, you see. And, you know, the sugar, they put the sugar in jars.
So when you were here, you had rationing?
Oh, yes. See, sugar in jars, so that and they measured the jars, and you know, so you knew that you had an inch left or half an inch, that kind of thing, you see. And of course, the way in which it was delivered in large sort of metal, well, I don't know what they were called, sort of pans, plonked at the end of one table, or the table, and then the master in charge or whatever, he would then, and he'd be there, you know, plump, plump, and literally it was passed down the table, and the tables then would have 20 on each side.
So you had very basic food, you know, like bread, for example.
Oh, it was, I can remember there was a strike here.
Was there?
Yes, there was a food strike. And the great thing about it was that we found that the porridge in the morning, I honestly think that you could have made cement out of the porridge in the morning. And and we couldn't eat it, you see. And Geo came in his gown, and I can remember us all, we'd had the strike. Unfortunately, it got to the papers. But, and he stood there, you know, with this bowl, and he, delicious, he said, delicious. And, you know, there we were all. And it was pretty grim, pretty grim.
So the tuck boxes must have been a real lifesaver for you.
They were. I mean, it was a time of austerity anyway.
Yes, Britain was in.
You know, when you consider this, I came in 49. Well, now, the state of the country was pretty bad. Ration books, ration for sweets, ration books for clothes and so forth. So it was pretty grim. Money, there wasn't a great deal of money around. Walker Thomas was the warden just before I came. He finished and then Geo took over. Walker Thomas, how we kept the place going during the war is incredible. He put a lot of his own money. And remember that at those times, Geo was the first warden to actually have a stipend, to be a salary. Prior to that, the warden bought the school and the content. And when Walker Thomas gave the actual furniture and things for nothing to the school. But,
so on the topic of wardens, you know, you've been under the authority of many
Yes.
wardens, haven't you?
I met a few of them. Some I wouldn't want to say anything about them. You know, you had Brindley, Dr. Brindley, who was Jones, very good frontman. The kind of man, you know, the parents, if he managed to get the parents through the door, they'd stay. And the children would come here. He was very, very, very good in that way. You had eccentric ones. You had people like Tree, who, you know, seemed to enjoy sort of being outside, building the block rather than inside. And you had a large number of, they were various. Claude, very, very affable kind of person. So, but I didn't get to know, although I was with the last two, I didn't get to know them very well. They were not, I didn't find them extremely sort of approachable and that kind of thing.
So your first warden, you know, did you respect him or did you fear him?
Geo, of course, was an immense brain, an immense intellectual, but a doer kind of person, you know, doer in the sense that he didn't have much sense of humor. And of course, I can remember the way he was called Bouncer, you see. And the boys gave him the name Bouncer in a matter of about 2 days, because he came down here, and we used to be in here with the tables sort of lengthways, and then, of course, the whole school would be down that way with juniors there, right up, middle school, and right down there, and then the seniors down that side. And he'd come in, and the head boy would be up on the desk, and he'd say, "Quiet," and you know, there we are, we all stood. And in it came in his gown, you see. And he came in, and he literally bounced, you see. And he was called Bouncer from that moment. And you know, you didn't think that a headmaster would come around and have a look at your shoes to see if they were clean, but he did. And if they weren't clean, you were sent out to his study. And it was the same, you had to show your nails, you know, to see whether they were clean, you see. And I remember going home and my mother wondering what this black stuff was at the back of my trousers. And this is where I'd been rubbing my trousers against the back to shine them up, you see, so that Geo. But he was an immense character. Then went on, as you know, to become the Archbishop of Wales and so forth.
So would you say there was much humour from the boys? Were they very mischievous?
Oh, boys haven't changed.
Boys, yes.
Boys haven't changed, I mean, the thing is, I can remember when I came I was a housemaster in Cadwg, and it was only later on that I realised that I was told by the boys that they had some kind of a telephone system running up in and they used to phone to say, Dai's coming, and that was me. And you see, so they knew exactly, where you were. But you expect boys to, in Llandovery, I remember McCarthy in Llandovery, and the boys, what they did was they hung a microphone down one of the trees, so that when he was, and of course it played in the house, and then you had the birds and things, you see, and he was trying to talk to the boys, and he had all these birds, and he couldn't understand where this noise was coming from. But no, I mean, the one thing you can say, boys haven't changed. Not boys, girls, and boys and girls.
So obviously when you came back as a master, it was the early days of the girls being introduced into college life.
Yes.
What are your earliest recollections of that?
Well, they were only about 5 or 6. They lived in the warden's house for some time. Then they went up to Windermere, I think. I think they were a good thing myself. I had some wonderful, and one of them followed me later on as head of English.
Yeah, Sian Collins.
Sian Collins. I still meet Sian, and we weren't going to be trained to be monks.
No, you weren't.
We weren't. You needed to be to have contact with it. And the thing was, you weren't allowed downtown. There's on the wall outside here, there is the word boundary on one of the actual bricks, stones down there. And the boundary, that means that you don't go down further than that, and you can go out and see it there today. No, I think it was a good thing, and it did mean that you had girls in the plays as well.
That's very true. Do you think when the girls were being introduced that certain members of staff or parents or all boys had reservations about letting girls into the college?
I'm not sure that there was a negative reaction. The thing was, of course, 5 girls to be shared amongst 150 or whatever boys was, I think that gradually as it increased, and it did mean that you could do far more things, etc. There were 1 or 2, of course, who thought, this is a boys', and I remember some of the old boys, coming back and sort of saying, this is a boys' school and so forth. But I think it is for the good.
So considering we're in the library now, or what would have been the hall in your day, and it's still very much the heart of the school today.
Oh, it was.
Was it the heart of the school in your day as well?
It was. This is where you had capping, you see. This is when the first 50 people who hadn't had their first 15 caps, the whole school were gathered together here in 2 rows right down there. And then the captain of the school, captain of the first 15, who named somebody's, and then, of course, you had to go down through the middle of this sort of these 2 rows, and they were allowed to, they were, what they should be doing was clapping you on the back, but there was the occasional person who took it as a wonderful opportunity of getting a kick in or something like that. And it became really rather, I think they've still got capping, but it's more civilized now.
Yes, it is a lot more civilized nowadays.
Because it became quite a thing. But, oh yes, and this is where we used to play ping pong on these tables. This is where table football, and the great thing about these tables, of course, is underneath them we find all these names. The names of people have carved their names there. And apparently, when Walker Thomas came to the school, he saw these tables, and there were so many carvings on them. He got them turned over. So really, it's underneath. The reason you got the carvings underneath is because, of course, you've got the surface of these would be the other way around, you see.
Because this is also somewhere where you did prep.
Well, this is where we had prep. The main source of heat, virtually, it was a big stove. And that is where we used to, when we had baked beans, we used to put the baked beans on the stove to warm them. And of course, and sat round it, and of course in prep time, we were all in the prep. But I can remember there was one master called Cull, who was not he was a biology, he was not a very pleasant person. And a few of us decided that we'd get our own back on Cull. So what we did was, we went to the stationery that morning and bought rubbers, the little rubbers.
Yes.
And then we decided that during the prep, we would say, Sir, could I go and see so-and-so to know about the prep? And as we passed the stove, we just plucked the piece of rubber on it. Well, you can just imagine what had happened after about 4 or 5. And we managed, actually, to destroy the prep for that evening. We all had to go out. And he was not amused, but there we are. But he was not an amusing person.
But talking about masters, when you came back, did you find that an easy or an odd transition coming back to Llandovery?
Well, no, lots of them were still there. You tended to have masters staying quite a long time. You sometimes think, that a few of them should have gone long ago. But they were. No, I found it quite easy because I knew so many of them, and I'd come back, you see, to play cricket and play this kind of thing with old boys, and so I knew quite most of them.
So, looking back at the common room, are there certain characters that really stand out for you?
Oh, yes. There was a Barnville. He was a biology master, and he'd been out in Australia, and he was a good mimic, And the break time, it was hilarious. He should tell us these stories. Then Davenport, who was a brilliant scholar, and he came in, but he wasn't on. He used to come in a few times a week, and he then, and he and Barnville together were hilarious, and Davenport was a fine cricketer. And I can remember him coming in one day and he said, Dai, he said, you wouldn't believe it, he said. You would not believe it. I saw in the test match, one of the players actually spat on the field. He was appalled by the fact that this fellow spat on the field. But no, there were lots of them. Ivan Davis, the classics master. We had a lot of good fun, and he had a wonderful way of telling a story or and there's Hugh Thomas, Hugh who taught French, and he was the one who actually brought tennis to a high standard in the school. Yes, he was there, and quite a number of quite funny and some not so. What do you call it? There was one who Carrie Jones, who used to be in the Greens, and he used to come in through the door with a bucket with all his books underneath when we sat down over drinking a coffee. and he used to come in. And I think the impression he wanted to give was, that we'd come early from lessons, and he had actually been teaching a little bit more than it. But no, they were. It was a good common room, good common room. Oh, and I remember the Mrs. Price, hilarious. She taught geography. And the thing was, of course, she'd been up at Oxford, and it was the year when the boats sunk. Remember that one of the sank, and Mrs. Price said, "Oh, I rowed up there," and of course, she was rather a large lady, you see. And one of the staff said, "Were you in the boat, Mrs. Price?" But she, she could take it, Yeah. She didn't realize what. I mean, she came in one morning, I'll never forget it. She said, "Oh, Dai," said, "somebody has been somebody's been in my room, going through my drawers." And there's all, what do you call it, laughed. And but no, she was a very good teacher, very good teacher.
So going back to kind of you as a housemaster, do you think there was competitiveness between the houses?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
I thought it was a big thing there. And we were, T. Cadog was the Welsh. Welsh. And we really took it. I remember, the Gwyn Jones, who became the captain of Wales Rugby, and Gwyn was in the house for 2 years. Staunch Welshman. And clog dancer, and we used to spend hours, and then, what do you call it, when I went then, I left as a housemaster and went back as a second, what do you call it, Glyn Evans was in the Blues. And I went back to his house, and we worked there for hours, with those, with the recitation and that kind of thing. And it was serious.
So today, Llandovery still has a strong sporting prowess.
Oh yes.
And Llandovery has a strong sporting heritage. What are your thoughts on that?
Initially, of course, it was a rugby. I mean, we can go back for ages. From Cliff Jones, Aim Rees, some of the great players of the 30s and the 40s and so forth. And then, of course, as far as now, obviously, we're still producing. I mean, George North, and Alan Wynne Jones, and some of the players that are coming through the school at the moment, and I think that Iestyn is certainly maintaining the tradition, the strong tradition, against immense odds. And the odds are, of course, these schools are now getting much, much bigger. And he's playing, he's got maybe 30 to choose from, and they've got maybe 300 or so at that. And, and the game has changed such that the physicality is so important, getting big boys and so forth. Whereas that wasn't as important, certainly, in my day. I remember when I was playing, I was most probably about 10 stone soaking wet. Well, now you wouldn't get near a side, you see, however skillful you were.
Tredegar, have you always thought of that as being a sacred place in college?
Tredegar Close was regarded as the place, and you didn't. They didn't play on it in the summer a great deal. You wouldn't be allowed to. They allowed the grass to grow on it, whereas now, of course, I noticed that they can obviously. They were playing on it the other day, and you need to use it, I think, and make it available to all. It is only sort of available to the few, You know, if you were in the seconds or so, or any of the other side, you were down the pitches, as we used to call them, you see. And it was a sacred place. And there was a little shed down there where you carried your boots, changed, then onto the field. And, you know, it was a great privilege when you ran on to Diga. It was, you know, your life, although it was a limited thing because it was important for the school. You see, in these games against Brecon and Monmouth in particular, you see. And then we used to play sides like retired internationals and that kind of, not many schools. But now I think Carwyn, when Carwyn, of course, was a great coach and a great Welshman. I was with Carwyn, of course, as an assistant master. I took over to Cardag after him. And you see, he thought you need to expand these things, and he did. So what you had the first 15, you had a second 15, you had an under 16s, an under 4. You know, the whole school played rugby. I can remember one day there were about 6 sides out when I was here, you know. I mean, one thing I can remember vividly is going down to Cardiff High on a Saturday morning with 2 sides, the senior coats and the first 15, and it was the day after Aberfan.
Oh, good God.
And we could see what was happening. And when we came back on that Saturday evening, it got dark then, of course, and we could see all the lights and all the work going on down there. Yes, I thought that has left an indelible sort of mark on my, you know, there was us youngsters, and you think of all those children who would never actually achieve, never arrive at that kind of, it was tragic.
So as you mentioned earlier, you know, Brecon Day.
Oh, Brecon Day, oh yes.
It's been a vast part of many generations of Llandoverians' experiences here. You know.
I mean, some of the things, you see, there was the monkey.
Yes, of course.
You see, we had the monkey, and then I can remember Brecon, actually one year, they had a coffin, the other side. So you know, and it was always Brecon one side, Llandovery the other side, and it was a great day.
I don't know if well, I remember when I was here, there was a week build-up.
Oh, yes.
And the captain would have to carry the monkeying around all day.
The monkey, and you know, you had little things like, for example, my day, it was, you presented the Red Sox sort of, I think it was before the Monmouth match. And then you would, you then, of course, for the Brecon match, everyone wore the Red Sox. It meant that you had your colours. It also had, you had the jerseys with blue cuffs.
Oh.
You see, blue cuffs on them. And I noticed when I came back how, you know, how things had changed. But the blue cuffs, I've still got my shirt with the blue cuffs at home.
So obviously when you first came here, you had those great rugby legends like Carwyn, for example.
Oh yes, I mean, but you see, the thing is, I think that unfortunately with Carwyn, he was a great coach. He was a great, you know, he read the game and he was an innovator in that sense. But there was more to Carwyn than that, you see. You know, Carwyn was a fine teacher, fine Welshman, you know, and unfortunately, most probably we can say that we didn't appreciate what he was in Wales.
So how did you find him as a housemaster?
Well, of course, I was assistant, and I found that as a housemaster, he spent more of his time elsewhere, sort of talking to various societies and this kind of thing. And I was landed up then sort of looking after the house. But I'm sure that, you know, the boys adored him, the boys thought him, what do you call it, that he was fine, you know.
So I've always been told the myth that when Carwyn finally left college and they had to redecorate the flat, they had to paint the ceiling 4 times because of the amount of cigarettes he used to smoke.
Well, the thing is, he was an incredible smoker. And the thing, it was quite incredible. He was always last coming down to breakfast, and the breakfast is to consist of a cup of coffee and a fag. He'd had his fag before coming in, and then, of course, when the boys had gone out, I think he had another fag. And that's about all, but I've never seen he had somebody. And the other thing is, of course, he used to smoke the strongest, the real strong stuff. Totally inept as far as anything mechanical. He had a Renault, and I can remember vividly. He came to see me one day and he said, "There's something, I don't know what it is," he said, "that there's a yellow, a red light winking at me all the time." Well, the thing was, of course, he'd run out of oil or something like that. Something, was... And of course, I don't think he ever learned to reverse, because he used to ask the boys, to come out and push him. I can remember pushing him down the, he was incredible. And the worst organizer. I had to apologize for Carwyn many a time. He'd said he'd come to talk to somebody down in Gower and somebody in Aberystwyth and somebody somewhere else, all at the same night. And he used to phone. We had intercom things in those days. And he phoned up, "Dai, do me a favour." I said, "Yes, what do you want?" "Can you phone these places and say I'm ill?" And there was me then lying on the phone, "I'm sorry, Mr. James says, he's got about a flu or something like that." And then he'd laugh, and then we say, "No, come on now." And then he said, "Let's go and have a drink." But,
he was quite a character then.
Oh, yes, we had great times here. And he and Ivan were big pals, Ivan Davis. And they used to go up to see the to see the opera and things, He was a very cultured man, very cultured man.
So apart from rugby, you were a very keen cricketer, weren't you?
Well, yes, I was a keen cricketer. I was in the cricket side before the rugby. But I can't say I was, I was all right.
How did you find cricket?
Oh, there was some, I can remember Adrian Lloyd, a fine cricketer here, and a fine rugby player. He's a farmer down here. Stephen Meredith most probably is the one that I can remember as a cricketer. He, in the first 4 games of one season here, actually scored a century. Yes. Mr. Marks was the one who, Mr. Bell and then Mr. Marks, who did a lot of work with them, because he was a fine bowler himself. And we went up to Scotland together, with the cricket side, believe it or not, to play one of the big schools up in Scotland. The only thing is we didn't play any cricket. It rained all the time. So we went all the way up there, but we had a great time. No, it was very serious. The cricket was taken very seriously here.
And of course, the pitches were
immaculate. Because we had a man called Williams, Helvet. He was absolutely superb. Do you know that we had a school horse? And what he used to do was, he used to put leather on the horse's hoof, so that they didn't mark the pitch. And he'd be down there about 5 in the morning, and he'd, make sure that the pitch. And then I'd go down, say, when I was captain, I went down, I said, "Nelvet, what's the weather going to be like?" And he'd looked up at Blind Horse. I don't know, he must have had some contact with up there on Blind Horse. And he looked up and he'd say, Mr. Gealy, I think you better put them in, he said. And he was right, because he knew that the rain was coming in or something like that, you know. And the schoolhouse was and then, of course, we had pigs. We bred pigs. You wouldn't believe this, that they bred pigs at the back, on the top of Tredegar there.
Good God.
And I'll never forget a gang of us. Harry Parry was the one who really was the instigator. And he said, look, let's go and give the pigs some soap. So we went up to and we gave the pigs soap. And of course, you could see then they, and of course, bubbles all over the place. And then the fellows to look after them running in back into the school, better get the vet. And, you know, and they had huts, you see, on the top of the Tredegar for some time. They had classrooms, huts. And God, I remember Bell coming in once, and the sheep, there were sheep on Tredegar, you see, he had some sheep on Tredegar. And the sheep had got into the huts, you know. He was not amused at all. But no, cricket was very... I enjoyed the cricket. Although, of course, what you've got to really remember, you couldn't do what we did now, because we got all these exams at various times and that. Whereas all the exams are at the end of term. Virtually, even if you sat, I remember playing the Brecon match on the Saturday and having A level on the Monday. You know, not a great preparation for but that's it was great. It was a.
So when you came back as a master, I assume you coached cricket.
Yes, I did, and then Geralt was then the warden, was a very, very good. He enjoyed his cricket. And he used to coach, he coached him, took him out to Jamaica with Tom Marks went out and took the team out, you know. We had a boy called Duncan, who was a very good golfer and a cricketer. Then there was Samuel, another who was the captain, a good cricketer. And they went out. Oh yes, it's a pity that unfortunately we're not big enough now, you see. No. I mean, in lots of schools, what happens is that the first 11 consists of, in the main, of first year 6, who haven't got exams and that kind of thing, you see. But it's a great game. It's a pity when I go down there and see that, you know, the square has virtually gone, but it's sad.
So in your time here, you know, have you seen a growth and diversity of sport that the college offer?
Well, important, very important. Because the thing is, you see, TP wouldn't allow you to kick a round ball, a soccer ball. I mean, I know of a friend of mine, we used to call him, W.H. John, we used to call him Willie Wong. Wonderful scrum half. But TP caught him playing soccer with the boys of the town, and he never got his first 15 colours.
Good God.
Oh yes, it was. But now, of course, you've got to have diversity. You can't, everybody, and especially with the game as it is now, you need to be pretty big and strong. But it's nice that they can go and, you know, play other games, introduce soccer, and which is what they've done and so forth. As long as you don't make it so thin on the ground with so very that you can't produce anything of quality. That's what you've got to make sure.
So looking at the musical aspect of college, you know, that must have been very important for you because you were a great singer.
Well, music, when I was here as a boy, was not. We had a good choir, and that's about all. And people, you could learn the piano with Tommy Jones, who was a fine, what do you call it? But there was no orchestra or anything. I think that it was very important that they in the end started a music department, and then the girls did a lot. You see, there was a girl who was here, Emma Edwards, and she did a vast amount of work with the girls and with the choir, and built a department which was, which was important, very important.
And do you think that was due to the lack of culture, as you previously remarked?
Well, the thing is, there wasn't a great deal, you see, there wasn't a great deal when I was here, and I think it was important. You had to. I mean, parents in the end dictate virtually, don't they? If you've got a very, very good son who is also a good musician, he could well be a good rugby player, but he could be a good musician as well. And you've got to be able to offer these things. And, economics is so important. I mean, I don't know whether they do politics or some kind of, most probably. I mean, these things are so important.
Do you have any memories of the chapel? Because that must be a very important part with music and everything like that.
Oh, yes. I still love the chapel. And we made, I've still got them at home. We made records,
Yeah.
and they were recorded in Lampeter Church, I remember. And, one of the indelible marks, one of the that has been left in the memory and it was an evening, a Sunday evening. Back doors of the church open, and the sun shining, and singing evensong. And we used to do all the evensong, and then we used to do all the psalms, everything was sung. And it was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. But, you see, they go home now for the weekends, don't they? We were all, you see, it was all boarding. Virtually, there were one or two people from town, but it was all boarding. You see, so you had them here all the time.
So, we obviously had great musical characters such as Jehu and Canuck and Staley on the organ,
Tom Canuck, and you had a man who was in maths, Slaney, when I was there, and he was one of the top organists in the country. Well, then retired, went down to St. David, still alive, and played in St. David's Cathedral for some time. Mike Slaney, wonderful chap. But a bit mad on cars. And he had one of these rather swish sort of sporting cars, Triumph 2 or something. And I can remember he took a boy in it for a run. Benjamin said, could I have a run in your car, sir? So he took him in the car, you see. And he ran down to Llandovery, and he used to go on this vast, quick, sort of 70, 80. And on the way back, apparently there was a lady going to cross the road. And he just flew past her, you see. And she landed back in the hedge. And somebody asked, somebody had a chat with her afterwards. He stopped and and he said, 1 minute he was there, he said, and the next minute he was gone. And she was, but he was a wonderful organist. Slaney was one of the best organists I've ever heard. And they renovated the organ, you see.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, I can remember that. The organ came from another chapel down in Morriston or something. The old, you had to pump the organ, you see, when I was here. And we had lots of fun because Tommy Jones used to tell us that as a punishment, you had to pump the organ. So you went to the back, you see, and there we are. And sometimes you had lines was the big thing in those days, writing lines, And we used to tie 3 biros together so that you could write three. And one evening service, I remember there's Harry Parry and myself, we'd done something anyway, we were pumping the organ. So I said to Harry, look, he said, let's stop pumping. And so I put you put around and he shouted at Tommy, Mr. Jones, if you don't let us off the lines, we'll stop in pumping. And he said, all right. He said, all right. And pump, 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 pump. but you know, he was a great chap, great chap.
Well, Dai, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Well, it's been great fun talking to you.
Well, I'm glad.
Yes, I've enjoyed it. It's at least told me that the old brain is, well, my memory is still good. Lovely, lovely talking to you.
Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Diolch yn fawr i
Diolch
chi.
yn fawr.